All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes. I am Dr. Adriana Miramontes Olivas, Curator of Academic Programs and Latin American and Caribbean Art at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art at the University of Oregon. It is my pleasure to introduce you to today's events, Encounters with Contemporary Art, a conversation with Sandra Ramos. Gracias, Sandra, por aceptar la invitación a participar en este evento con nosotros. Thank you, Sandra, for accepting the invitation to participate in this event. I want to thank all attendees of this webinar for joining us, and my sincere gratitude goes to all my colleagues at the JSMA as well for making this conversation possible, organized in conjunction with the current exhibit, What We Leave Behind, Lo que Dejamos Atrás. The Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, where I am currently located in Eugene, was founded on Kalapuya Ilihi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. Dispossessed of their homeland between 1851 and 1855, the Kalapuya today are citizens of the Confederated Tribes and continue to make contributions to the land we call today Oregon. At the museum, we have been organizing a series of events, exhibitions, and workshops to highlight their voices, educate ourselves, and transform the institutions in which we operate and for which we feel such a strong connection. These events include the ongoing exhibition, Our Shared Breath, Creativity and Community, and the upcoming lecture this Sunday, Weaving Sovereignty, the Art of Ceremony in Indigenous Oregon. Please check our website for specific times and to learn more about this and other programs. I introduce Sandra Ramos, who has an MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute and degrees from the University of Arts in Cuba, Instituto Superior de Arte, and Academia San Alejandro in Havana. Her work was recently exhibited at the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies at Harvard University, at the Arizona State University Art Museum, and the Lloyd Art Museum in Miami, Florida. Other exhibitions of her work have been held at the National Museum of Fine Arts in Havana, Cuba, Espacio de Arte Contemporáneo in la Villa Joyosa in Alicante, Spain, the Maison Rudolph Duguay in Quebec, Canada, and the Nina Menocal Gallery in Mexico City, just to name a few. She recently participated in Art Space San Antonio, Texas residency, Home Away, and prior to that, at the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh and the Open Study Art residency in Tokyo, Japan. As I mentioned before, her work is currently on view in the exhibit, What We Leave Behind. And we have a virtual tour of this exhibition for you, but we also invite you to explore it on your own and at your own pace. For now, I just want to briefly say that the exhibit investigates the causes and the consequences of the contemporary global diaspora and suggests the notion of mobility as a fundamental human right. Artists in this exhibition include Juan Carlos Alom, Lilian Nieves, Luis Palacios Caín, Norma Villarrivero, and Sandra Ramos. And here we have the view inside the museum in the Maurice Graves Gallery of that exhibition. So again, the invitation is for you to explore it on your own at your own pace. You can also click on the labels to learn more about each of the artworks. And here we have a zooming in into the work of Sandra Ramos. So Sandra, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you to the Jordan Schnitzer Museum, to Will and Debbie for making possible this conversation. I'm very happy that my work is part of this exhibition. And these three works specifically are paintings, and they were done by me in 2004. This is part of a continuous series that I started since 1993, in which I deal with the subjects related to insularity and the idea of the geography of the island of Cuba as a body. It's a kind of self-portrait embodying the island, and they are all the reference also, of course, to isolation, censorship, and these pieces made at the beginning of 2000 were also very directly related to all the political prisoners that were in Cuba at that time, at the end of the 90s and beginning of 2000. I will continue to talk about these subjects in my presentation. Well, as I was talking before, the idea of immigration, isolation, and political and ideology and how they affected individual life is very present in my work. Since 1993, I graduated from the Higher Institute of Art in Havana. I studied etching and aquatinting there in the Department of Printmaking, and my first solo exhibition was a series of 30 etchings and aquatints that deal with personal narrative and collective stories related to Cuban immigration and diaspora. This is a part of this series that was very personal, and it's a kind of a story that narrates the immigration of my then love partner. In the pieces titles are "When Everybody's Gone, the Loneliness Arrives," then communication becomes each day more difficult. Maybe I must divide myself in two, and now what can I hold you with? As part of this series, I also start to work with the idea of the map of the island as embodying the figure and the idea of how the place that you're born define forever your life. In this case, I use a poem by Virgilio Piñeira, the weight of an island. And the first verse of this poem is the dance circumstance of the water all around. So in some way, this print is very definitive in my work, because it sets some of the subjects that I will use forever. No, the kind of San Sebastian also, all this reference to sacrifice and the idea of the island as a place that defines all our future and destinies. In the 90s also, it was a big crisis and exodus of the rafters in Cuba, and I developed a series of work like the raft and suitcases painting that were dedicated to this subject of the big exodus and immigration of Cuban. In this case, I used suitcases that were used and that people keep in their homes, and they give me, because at that time in Cuba, it was impossible to buy a new suitcase. It was not a store where to buy this kind of luggage, and then we need to reuse these suitcases from the 50s and the wood suitcases that the students used to go to the mandatory work in the farms once a year. Here you have some examples of this work that also relate, of course, to the idea of people that were dying on the sea that we didn't know the numbers, and the hopes and desires and dreams of the Cuban Jones that immigrate looking for a better life. I also continue to work in the 90s with the idea of very big suitcases that were in some way immovable. They were like the storage of the life of different generations. I did one for a girl, one for an couple and one for an old man, with all the possessions that people cannot carry and the memory that they cannot carry when they emigrate. And on that time, I also start to work more with aquariums and other kind of container, like the suitcase was a container, and the aquarium also, the aquarium is kind of invisible container. And I was dealing with the idea of all the deaths that have been on the crossing the Florida Stretch, and create like this underwater world, like kind of Atlantida created from this loss, so many loss of life. This idea of the aquarium is also recurrent in my work. In 2013, I create this video. I'm going to see the fragment only. In this video, the girl is like looking for all the ways to transpassing the invisible walls of aquarium to reach another border. So it's about the concept of the concept of border, the impassable border, and the confinement that Cubans felt, because during many years, travel outside of the island was very hard for the majority of the population, because we need a official permit and also a visa from the country that we are going to travel. And usually the people that travel mainly to emigrate. And this is a piece also from the 90s, is the new ideology, study, war, and defense. And in this kind of pieces, I ironically deconstructed the slogans of the revolution. Like they all deal with the idea of ideology, indoctrination, in a very humoristic and ironic way. They are relating to the narrative of the revolution. And the way of manipulation of the political and ideological discourse through education and through the control of the medias. So in 1999, I started to work with animations and video. I got my first video camera in 1999, and I started to record all over the city of Havana. And then this is one of the pieces that I did, is a machinery to drown the sorrows, and is reflecting the kind of containers that you can see in the political manifestations and in Cuba. It has to do with the idea of alcohol and the sea as a way of evasion for Cuban people. The alcohol is like the psychological evasion, and the sea and the ocean is like the physical evasion. And in the proper installation, the people that see through the hole, they look inside the container that is called pipa. It's all full of the sea. It's like the sea in movement, but they also can drink rum from the container. And the Dream of the Reason is another of the pieces that I did at that time in beginning of the 2000s. It's an animation of the Goya print with the same name, The Dream of the Reason, produced monsters. And what I did was to take the containers that are commonly in the Cuban markets, that are very rustic, iron cast containers, usually empty because there are not a lot of food. And I made like this very beautiful light boxes with all the products that you can find in the development countries, from pictures that I took in markets in United States, Canada, and Germany. And so it's the idea of the scarcity and all the poverty that we were suffering, also in relation to populism and to all the discourse of the revolution, on in some way linking this to the utopian dreams of the French Revolution and the Illumination, like equality, justice, and freedom, and how this was the dream of also for Cuban Revolution, but then never accomplished, because the life of the people were getting worse and worse is there, and there is a lot of poverty there. And this piece also has to deal with the same idea of everyday life in Cuba and the problems that Cuban people have in their daily quotidian life, like the problem of money, the salary that is like the stores in Cuban peso where you can buy nothing. So the piece was kind of a electro daily graph of the society, like searching for the beats of a sick society, and touching different subjects like transportation, money, the problems of old people that don't have a lack of resources for their life. And then I start to work in a series of other works that are more related to philosophical ideas and in relation to poetry also. Like this is Alone at Night, I Marry My Bed. It's an installation of embroidered pillows and painting about poets that commit suicide. And we have also the Road of Uncertainty that is more related. It's an installation in which I create the Big Dipper constellation in the ceiling of the installation. And it's in relation to all the fears and concerns that we have in contemporary life. It's very like psychedelic, the effect of the videos inside the pieces. And from that series also, I started to work with the idea of entropy and entropidoscopios, and entropy in relation to language and narrative, and how we receive so much information in contemporary life through the media that we don't know exactly what we are looking at. And this series also deals with the idea of aestheticization of the disgrace, no, aestheticization of everything, of the war, of the poverty, of all the problems that we have in our planet, and how through the media all these in some way dilute. In the same sense, I did this installation that is called In My Head, and it's more based on a kaleidoscopic deformation of my memory through my family films and movies. And this also was a video installation, Airmall Mirage, again with the idea of the hope and expectations and desires that people that emigrate want to accomplish. And Parallel Roads is related also to the idea of so near and yet so far. It's photos of Cuba, different places in Havana, and photos of different places around the world. And when they go together, because it's a moving piece, you can see that there's something very similar in these two images, even when they are so far. Also created a lot of work with quotes from poets, like in this case was Gaston Vaquero, who was an exiled poet at the beginning of the revolution. He created this poem that I love that is called The River, that deals with the path from childhood to adultness. And I create this tunnel that was very common in Cuban parks when I was a child. So people need to go through the tunnel like if they were a child. And also they have like these white pencils that they can write every scene that they want in the walls of the tunnel. So it have to do with childhood memory, but also with censorship, and with poetry, of course, and also with intellectual memory and all we get from the artists and poets that came before. And this is a piece that I show in the Museum of Fine Art in Havana in my solo exhibition during the Havana Biennial, and it's 90 miles. 90 miles is the distance between Havana and Miami. No, it's the distance between Key West and Punticacos. Is the shortest distance between Cuba and United States. And so in the piece, the people can walk this photograph that I took from the airplane from Havana to Miami, and see how short and easy and beautiful is seen from the sky, this trajectory that at the same time has been so long and sad for the people that cross this by boat or raft. So it's like the idea of we are so close geographically and so far politically. And I used the same idea in this work, 50 miles, that was dedicated to the immigration from the Balkans to during the war of Yugoslavia, from the Balkans to Italy. And this is another piece from the same series, with using the void of in Key West, so near and yet so far. And at the time I used a lot of passports, IDs, and the idea of how also like the geographically you are determined, your life is determined for the place you born. Also your IDs in some way determine so much the possibilities or impossibilities that you will find in your life. And this is transitory identity that deal a lot with the subjects that I think Adriana is talking about in the exhibition. That is the constant diaspora that we live in contemporary world. When I moved to United States, I also created a series of work, paintings and installation that have to do with my ideas about American society, and of course the urban approximation to new spaces like the cities of, in this case, Las Vegas. I took the quotes from Alice in Vegasland, from Alice in Wonderland, and I created this series, Alice in Vegasland, that is kind of also a reflection about the how artificial a city as Las Vegas is, and how weird for an individual. And this is also more in the relation between Havana and Miami. I create a series of artist books that in some way highlight this, my feelings as when I established in Miami. In this case, it's Ithaca, based in a poem by Constantine Cavafy, a poem that deals with the idea of the journey, the life as a journey. In this relation between Havana and Miami, I also create this series. It's titled The Perpetual Movement of the Cuban War Between Two Shores. And warm is the despective way in which the officials or Cuban government call the immigrant, the Cuban immigrants that established in United States or any other place. It's a way to say that you are not revolutionary. It's established so you are a worm. But worm is also the way that the slang that people used to call this kind of duffel bags that the Cuban immigrants bring to the island full of the things that people in the island need, from food to any kind of objects and clothes and everything. So this is also a kinetic installation that is kind of a bell, a airport bell, in which this worm is eternity going in circles from Miami to Havana, carrying all the things. From this series, I have also some other projects, all using the idea of the duffel bag. So also, when I moved to Miami and United States, I started to work a lot with ideas relating to sociopolitical, and I made some other prints like this. The departure have to do with the idea that even when I moved, my head was still in Cuba, all my subjects and my family, and I was like missing this. But also there are other pieces that deal more with general idea of the world, and the idea of ecology and how we are destroying our planet, and also destroying ourselves, because destroying our habitat is just a kind of a suicide. No? This is mundicidio, world suicide. And then in 2016, with the political campaign between between Hillary and Trump, I started this series, the Powerball, in which I confronted in dialogue some political leaders from all over the world. And as usually that I use humor in my work, in this case, the parallel is between the Powerball lottery, that is one of the most common lotteries in United States, and politics, like in this ping pong table that you can see the map of America in red or blue. It's like a match between Hillary and Trump. From the same series is, oh, sorry. Is this, these are engraving and acrylic that are portraits of different leaders, also made with the paper of the Powerball lottery. So you see like Obama, Putin, Raul, the Pope, different leaders around the world. And then I start to work with a quotation from Thomas Nast, a boss tweet that was a character he created at the end of the 19th century to deal with a very corrupt mayor in New York. And I create the character of Trompito, coming from this vision of Thomas Nast in relation to how then President Donald Trump was dealing with politics. And here you have another video that I will only show a fragment also, related to the COVID crisis. 2000. in relation to this series, I created a series of paintings that in some way they were like a compilation of what was happening every day in politics. I refer a lot to cartoonists in my work, because in Cuba also I was using like the character of Liborio and the food that were created in the 19th century, because I always think that we need to learn a lot from our history, because we repeat like the cycles on failures that sometimes we already know about that if we look back. So they were like a compilation of the news, what was happening every day, kind of satiric reflection about that. And then in 2018, I did this series that was mostly when I back to Cuba, I took a series of pictures of my niece that is still living there. And she was a kind of reincarnation of the character that I created in the 90s. She was using the same uniform that I used when I was a child. She was passing by the same hazards and problems and have the same conflicts with. So it's a kind of representation of a new generation that is suffering still the same insoluble situation. No? And the series title is Apocalyptic Cartographies. And again, it's using the shape of Cuba, the idea of the immigration and education. And then I started to work also with the idea of visual haikus in 2020, that for me are like these very short videos that are in loop, and they have just one idea, like movies in painting, or paintings in movement, that also relate to these different subjects of ecology and idea of the generation of the planet, also the thinking. And then also resurrection is about the cycles of life. That maybe sometimes some things need to be destroyed to reborn. And this is two island fighting. It's also one of the items. And it's about reflection about the division that the Cuban population that is also created by the government in relation to the people that live inside and outside China. Media and the manipulation of the media, and how we are all subject of this side tribune. And more recently, I started to work in this series, Impossible Dialogue, Sumerian Disputations. In some way, the methodology is the same that with the Trump series. I create every day a piece from the news and information that I receive from social medias. In this case, the piece established a parallel between social medias and the way we narrate our life today in relation with the Sumerian tablets that are the oldest form of communication, of writing communication that we have known. And they were so poetical, and they were expression of a society that even when they have many conflicts, it have like a center. And in some way, I wonder what is is someone in the future analyze what we transmit and the way that we so polarize it and that in which we communicate through the social media, what we think about our present. No? So also the pieces deal with the idea of permanence and technology, and this very old technology that is all made in clay that looks so fragile, has last for thousands of years, and we don't know what will happen with our phones and computers and laptops in the future, because the technology is changing so much that we don't know how this information will be preserved. Also, part of this series, when I was making this series, happened the protest in Cuba of 11th of July. And then I started to use also this series as a platform for what was happening and how the social medias allow me to know about what was happening in Cuba, and was the only way that Cubans on the street have to communicate with people outside. So it's in some way this series highlight the bad and the good on virtual communications and social medias nowadays. For instance, this is one of the funds dedicated to Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara, that is one of the Cuban dissidents that is on jail now, that have been in jail for almost 2 years, more than 2 years. There are almost 1,000 Cuban in jail since the July 11 riots. And also on 2022-21, I started this series that is related to education. Education always has been a subject in my work, as you can see, with the idea of adoctrination and the idea of what we transmit and how we select and who selected what is important for people. And so in this way, this has to do with my memory also as a child in 20th century, using all the furniture that were normal in the Cuban schools at that time, and kind of a line of Western civilization, Western education line history. And for the series, all is video projection in each of the furniture. And for the series, I work with children of the school, and I ask them for drawing on the walls of the classroom their local heroes. So it's for me, it was important to highlight like their local history and the people that really matter to them. Their teacher, their firefighter, their grandmother, whoever is principally deal with them every day in relation to this broad history that sometimes is not so definitive for people, for individuals. And then as part of this series, I also create an installation. It's titled Tank Man, that is one of the last things that I have done. And is they are portrayed of political prisoners, dissidents, and people all over the world that confront power. And so these are like small chalkboards, and the paintings are made with chalk. And the name is in the chalk also. And also the idea of invisibility sometimes, and also again, permanence and impermanence, what is important for us and what is not. And how all these people is many times are invisible. But they are so important for defending our democracy and freedom. That's all, I think.
So we invite questions from the audience, and I also have a couple of questions. So please type your questions in the chat. And in the meantime, Sandra, can I ask you to tell us more? Well, I have a couple of questions, but perhaps we could start with the idea of living in between. You have a studio in Havana, Cuba. You also have your studio practice in Miami. So I was wondering if you could tell us about how this sort of like living in between has changed your artistic practice, and what are some of the challenges of, you know, doing that with the two countries?
Well, really, most of the time in Miami now. At the beginning, I was going more often to Cuba. Now it's a little more difficult, but I still keep my studio there. My sister is there, and she's in charge of the studio. But for me, it always has been very important to keep the communication with both sides of, like with Cuba, because I have a lot of families and friends there, and the artistic community in Cuba is important for me to keep in touch with them, and to keep in touch with what is happening. And many of the subjects of my work come from this dialogue and all the concerns that Cubans have in relation to the island and politics and ideology. But I have been living in Miami for 10 years now, and so I am much more rooted now than before. I have my studio in Bake House Art Complex, also integrated to the community here. But for me, the idea of transitority is very important in contemporary life. I think that we all belong to different places. In Miami, many people is from all over the world. Like we have a lot of Venezuelans, Asians, Europeans, Argentinians, and I think it's part of the normality on today, no? Like people move from their original cities. And also, I think in some way we have like the physical transitority, but we have also the virtual transitority, because we are much more communicated with whatever place in the world of people all over now than it was in 20th century, for instance, that I grow up. I think I grow in a completely different environment, completely different possibilities. When I was a child, I never thought about traveling outside of Cuba. And I think it's something that is still happened to many people in Cuba. They still live like in other time and with conditions that are very difficult and different from mainly all the world. No? Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Ernesto Leiva. He says, ¿tienes un método o un medium que más te gusta para presentar tu arte? So do you have a medium that you prefer to show your work? Is it photography, pintura, painting?
No, I don't. I love to use so many medias. It depends on each idea. I love installation. I think in some ways the media that I like more, because it allows me more communication with people. Like people become part of my installation. Like the people that walk through the bridge, or the people that reflected on the mirrors, or who never play with the Powerball bingo or whatever. I like this aspect of installation. but I also love to paint and drawings and print making because it's more intimate.
There's another question from David. It says, thinking about your installation, Invisible Poems, how does play, childhood, and exploration inform your work?
I think a lot. My work is very playful, and this has to do with the idea of humor inside my work. That is very important, but also with participation, as I was talking before. And the character, the alter ego that I have been using since the 90s is a child. It's like the girl that is inside me that never grow. So for me, childhood is very important, and also because I think for me, illustrations, cartoons, like all this kind of art that is considered not so important, not elitist, like big paintings or big sculpture. For me, it's very important, like everyday art, like the art that people consume every day, like the medias, like the cartoons, like illustrations, and all these have to do with the idea of playing and also childhood and infancy.
So from Simone, we have a message. It says, hi, thank you for the great talk. How do you see evolve the issue of migration in relation to Cuba during the period from the 1990s until today? And how this evolution was reflected in your work in terms of approach, themes, and media?
Oh, it had been a lot of change because, as I told you before, I think before Obama, like before the last 10 years, to travel outside Cuba, all Cubans need an official permission given by the government. You don't need only a visa. We all need a visa to travel to Mexico, to travel to mainly all the countries, and United States visa is the most difficult to get for a Cuban. But besides that, we also need at that time a official Cuban permission that allows you to go outside. Usually, for instance, the artists get that through the Ministry of Culture. You need an invitation letter to someone who invite you to an exhibition outside at the, or the sport people, the athletes needed to be invited to a competition. But normal people, everyday Cubans that want to go in tourism or do whatever or visit their families abroad, they never get this permission because it was not for individual trips. And then when after Fidel left the government and also with the relation with Obama, the Cuban government took out this permission. So any Cuban now don't need that. You just need a visa. So that is a little improvement in relation to what happened before. The children's also before they need a special permission to leave the country, not now. But anyway, immigration has always been very conflicted in Cuba because in some ways the only way that people get to improve their life, there are kind of not solutions inside the island to change some part of the society that seemed to be very inamovible. And so the people left the country and established in other places. All these, I think, in some way have been shown in my work. From the rafters in the 90s to more like people traveling in airplane and dreaming with travel to Europe or so. But anyway, we still have the same problems. Still, we have a lot of people that risk their life in rafts or through the forest in Latin America to pass the borders. So it's very, very sad, no? That is the only solution that the Cuban have. that nothing is changing inside.
Tom says, great work. You have exhibited your work in Cuba, often with criticism of politics. How is that possible? Or what reaction do you have from the authorities there?
Yeah, I think in some way that's possible because in the 90s, after the exodus of all the people from the 80s that were very many artists in the 80s were very censored by the Cuban government. In the 90s, it was a moment that was more open to criticism and to political art, even when there was still censorship. And in that moment, in some way, I established my practice internationally, and that in some way protect me. Also, there are a lot of pieces that I never show in Cuba because they were not allowed to show in the exhibition. But some very strong pieces I was able to show, like the bridge in the Museum of Fine Art, etc. So it depends in Cuba. Always depend of who is in charge in the cultural institutions, how is the moment at an international level. It's very complicated, but in some way I have been very lucky to be producing my work without so much fear from censorship. Also, I think usually the most censored artists are artists that work with performance and that work on the streets. My work is more like intimate, like for institutions or like a controlled space.
We have question from Ernesto. What message do you have for future Cuban immigrant artists in the States? Any advice?
Well, you would need to work a lot, and try to establish, communicate with the people, find your group in wherever you establish. Try to. It's hard because we came from a very close group of artists in a very, everybody knows each other usually in the context of Cuban art, but the United States is a very big country and there are artists from all over the world. There are amazing artists from all over the world, so it's more complicated, but you have your voice and keep working is just the way.
I think I cannot read the full name, but it says, thank you, Sandra. Your work is very poignant and meaningful. I was in Cuba in 2017 and visited your family home and toured your studio with your sister and brother. And it was an amazing and touching part of our Cuban journey. I met so many incredible artists, especially in Havana, and I've been wondering what is happening with the artistic community with the lack of tourism due to COVID and the political economic situation. Are there any ways to support artists in Cuba now? I am also curious what is next for you in your artistic journey. Gracias.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Yes, it's a very difficult situation, not only for artists, for everybody in Cuba, because recently Cuba, the population depend a lot from the tourism, like the paladars and all people that work related to rent and tourists in general is the only way that individuals get some independence from the government. The way to help, I think, must be like directly approach to people that you know, and if you have some artist contacts, then reach them and ask about what their needs. And also, I think what is happening is that many people, many artists are living, flying the country, are establishing in Europe, in Spain. There are a lot of artists, Cuban artists now living to Spain. it's sad because it's like this cycles that always happen in Cuba, that we have like a good moment during Obama. It was a good moment. It in some way it looks like it would be more open, the society. And then now we have all these problems and the repression and so many people also incarcerated. So it's very sad. I hope it this change, and I hope I want to continue to hope and believe in a future for Cuba, and I hope that happens someday.
From Carolina, not a question, but a comment. Sandra, thank you. As a Nicaraguan immigrant and daughter of former political prisoner, I really relate to your art and really enjoy your presentation. Thank you for sharing our struggles and the stories of immigrants leaving our beloved land in pursuit of progress and freedom. Gracias, Patria Libre y Vivir.
Gracias.
I'm from John. Wonderful talk, thanks. Can you also talk about censorship in the US? You have had some of that too, I believe.
Yeah, I have. In Cuba, I am a gusana, and in United States, I am a communist. I have been, I have been censored from a mayor in Coral Gables. I was invited in 2021 to an event in an exhibition illuminated Coral Gables. It was organized by Lands Fund. And the mayor of Coral Gables staged that me and another artist from China, we were from Cuba and from China, and then for that we were considered communists, and he cannot allow that we show in Coral Gables. That was so silly, and I think. But of course, it showed how totalitarianism in some way, and the people who think that they own their political status works against culture and intellect and society and freedom, and that's so sad. For me, it was very sad that happened because I think that happened in Cuba is normal, but it happened here in the United States, that is a country that have fight so much for democracy and freedom, is very silly. But it's part of what all that we are seeing now, all this polarization, and I think it's very dangerous, and to see what is going on with all these fights between Democrats and Republicans, and the extremisms that this could bring to the American society. Mm-hmm.
Wow, I think this is an excellent, way to end the conversation. We are at about time, and I think the message that you're sending on this struggle for democracy and against censorship, is so important and relevant in the United States, right? But also in many other countries. So thank you for this conversation, Sandra, and thank you all for your questions and comments. I'm sure there's more to say and to ask, but I hope that we can continue the conversation through different channels. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening, and please keep checking our website for more information on Sandra Ramos, her website. We have it here on the chat, and also about the exhibition What We Leave Behind. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that joined the conversation. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you to the JSMA team again.